Good morning. Reading from Luke 12, verses 13 to 21. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.'" This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Well, hey, good morning again. Hope that you are doing well today. Missed you last week. I was away. My family and I were away. Whoa. And hey, glad to be back. Bishop Charlie, I know, did a great job serving our community and being with us. And if this is your first time with us, my name is Mike, pastor here at Benediction. We are pumped to have you in the room today, truly to join us in the worship of the triune God. And we'd love to connect with you, say hi, get to know you. Right? You can fill out, or you can go to this QR code. It should be on the screen in just a minute. And it gives you a little more information on who we are and what we are doing. We'd love to just hook up and get to know you and answer any questions that you may have. Now, for our church family, a couple things. We've got two things I want to just say quickly before we get into the Word. Number one, as we've said for the last few weeks, is we do intend to have a couple of kind of church picnic-style hangouts over the next couple months. And so the first one's coming up in 2 weeks, August 17th. The way it's going to work is we're going to have service in the morning here, have service normally, and then after service is done, you guys can go home, grab a picnic, a table, not a table, but, well, if you have one, I guess, but, chairs and whatnot. And then we're going to meet up at a location in Elmira, which we'll give you that information a little bit later, and just have an afternoon to hang out and eat together and be together, play some games. If you got long games, bring them up. It's just a time for us to be a family outside of these four walls. And so we're going to do that in August and in September. It's going to be great. And do that. It's always good for us to be called back into the reality that our worship is not just in our song, it's not just in our showing up, it's in our offering unto God and generosity towards Him. And so I just want to remind us again that we worship God through the tithes and our offerings as an act of trust, of returning to Him what He's given to us in faith, of loving His people and truly discipling our soul, disciplining it towards the way of Christ in our generosity. And so I want to call us to rightly order ourselves in that way again today, which obviously kind of connects quite readily with the scripture that we heard read today. The scripture that we heard proclaimed in our church this morning, our service, right, is one of those texts that kind of talks about money and talks about stuff, but a very kind of in-your-face way that Jesus does. It's kind of right there, kind of hits you a little bit. And the problem with it is, upon first reading, when you really get into it, it can make you feel a little bit weird. And the reason why is because on face value, right, of course, most of us agree in principle, right? That there's something that we are compelled to see what Christ says is actually true. But then when we think about it, the implications of His words feel very burdensome. And I want to be honest with you. Today is not burdensome, but it is heavy. And there is a difference. Right, because His words are life, His words are spirit, right? And so Jesus, He, in this short little parable, addresses many things, but the three I want to focus on today, just for our attention, is He deals with what we would call covetousness or greed, sloth, and vanity. Okay, these are the big three things I want to deal with today to focus our attention and our time where the lectioner has us in the book of Luke. And so first, as we read this text, we hear about a family dispute. It's some family drama, right? Because who doesn't love that, right? If you have siblings, you know what happens, right? And it seems in this case that a father has passed away and there's an inheritance battle going on. And so the younger brother comes, right, which is presumably the younger brother because who else is complaining about it, you know what I mean, right? And he says to Jesus, he hears that Christ is teaching. And so, siblings can be some of the most sneaky, conniving people, right? Because did you notice, right, this little brother, right, publicly goes to Jesus in front of the whole crowd and says, my brother's being unfair, can you fix it? Right? Trying to set him up for public shame, right? But Jesus is not having anything. He answers back to this man and he says, right, who made me the arbiter of you? Right? Who made me the judge of your family drama? What do you think I'm here for? Right? That's not what this is about. He's coming and essentially saying, my brother's being greedy. Can you help me with this? Which, ironically, as we're going to see, Jesus points out, he is the one being greedy, but he says that he is not this man's judge. Now, a key thing here just in the teaching of Christ is Jesus is not saying that he's not a judge, that he's not an arbiter of these things, that he is, of course, as we confess him, to be the King of Kings. He's the Lord of Lords. He is the God of the universe. He judges all things. But what he's doing is he's reminding this young man that that's not why I'm here. Like I'm teaching, I'm not here to just go with your little family issues. But what's interesting about Jesus is although he says, I'm not the judge of this, he ends up making a judgment. Did you notice this? Right? It's not a material one. He doesn't divide the inheritance. He makes a moral one. It begins dividing this man's heart. He begins opening up in front of everyone and demonstrating his insight into human hearts, especially this man. And he uses this guy as a launching pad for what not to do. Like, I'm just saying, that's a bad day in my books. Right? If your life becomes the place where Jesus needs to teach off of what not to be, like that's not a good day in my mind, right? Now, luckily, in the grace of God, we don't know this man's name. Because if we did, you bet a sin would be named after him, right? Like Simon in the book of Acts, after Simon, right? Like this would have been that day. And I'm like, all I can say to us at least is this, is live a life at the base where your life does not become, the tragic example of what not to do. You know what I mean? Right? Just at least strive for that. I think that's a reasonable desire. But Jesus, he goes off on this moment and he looks at the whole crowd, okay? And he says to them, and this is really key what he says, watch out. Right? Be on guard, the ESV I think puts it, but in the Greek it's more about the eyes, it's more about watching, looking. Remember, one of the key disciplines of our faith, we've talked about many times, is this idea of watchfulness, right? Of the Greek, the idea of nepsis, of guarding the heart, the thoughts of the heart, of being aware of what's going on. Jesus is saying that, guard your heart against all covetousness. And again, in Greek, that word can mean covetousness. It can mean kind of greediness or avariciousness, right? Like this desire to have more and take in and just have all the stuff. He says, guard against that thing. Guard against it. For your life does not consist in the abundance of possessions, right? Seems like a reasonable thing, right? In fact, I would say this. For most of us, okay, of course we agree with Christ in principle, yes? Like we know, if you're Christian or not, right? We know life is not about stuff. It's not about my bank account or my cars or my shoes or my vacation. Like we know that is true, but let's be honest with ourselves. In heart, we disagree. In fact, it's very rare to find someone who actually agrees with Christ. Right? Even the monks, if you read some of their writings, those who have taken these vows of poverty still struggle with this one. Right? There's still this great temptation to think my life is about what I can have and the comforts of it and the safety of it and security of having these things. And so in this, Jesus then gives a parable. He gives this lesson. Hey, your life is not about stuff. Don't be greedy about it. And so here's how he teaches it. And he says that there's a guy, okay? There's this guy, a rich man, right? And apparently, he had an amazing year, right? He's crushing the farming game. He's got more crops than he knows what to do with. And so he says to himself, here's what I need to do. I need to build a bigger barn. Obviously, right? I'm going to tear down the old ones. They're not good enough. And I'll use the money that I've made from this new crop to build bigger barns. And might as well scale this thing up. And I got enough grain that I can just sit back. I can relax. Right? I can eat. I can drink. I can be merry. He's literally confessing the fact that he has made so much in this one season, he's never going to have to work again. Like we're talking like financially he is set apparently. Now, ironically, he's talking about grain, which I don't even know grain, it's perishable. It doesn't keep for his whole life. But he's getting all excited about it. Right? And he builds this kingdom, this little kingdom of his own, right? And he decides, I'm not going to work again. I'm just going to eat, I'm going to drink, I'm going to relax. And then Jesus says God comes to him. That very night, he says, hey, your soul's required of you. You're going to die. And to where does all the stuff go? To whom does all the grain that you've stored up, where is that going? Right? Is it going with you? Implication being, of course it's not going with you, right? It's going to go to others at that point, whether it's through thieves or through giving away or whatever it might be. It will not come with him. And so Jesus says, and this is the same fate, this judgment of God is the same fate for those who store up treasures on earth but are not rich towards God. The people who have all the stuff in life but nothing in soul, who have chased after mammon but not sought after the kingdom. This is their fate. They will stand before God and find themselves judged. And then famously right after this, Jesus in the Gospel of Luke goes into those very famous words, therefore do not be anxious about your life, but what you eat or what you will drink and things like this. And so what do we have in this parable? I want to break this out for us, right? Remember those three things, greed, sloth, and vanity, right? So before we do that, let's get a couple things out of the way, just because this is a parable, a section of the Scripture that often is quite confusing. Jesus, right, does not say in this parable that everyone who is rich is damned. Okay? He didn't say that. Like objectively, that didn't come out of his mouth. He did say, right, that those who have treasures in this life but are not rich towards God, right, they have condemnation. There's judgment for them there, right? Which means then that it is possible, obviously, to be rich towards God and rich in life. It's possible, okay? We're not against that. Hear me today, right? In this way, Jesus is not making wealth in itself a sin. The issue wasn't the man got rich and had a great season. That's not the issue, right? In fact, at all. But as Jesus says many times over, in many different ways, wealth in and of itself is a trap. Right? It's something that the soul does not know how to deal with well. And the reason for this is because greed is a sin not easily detected. In fact, this whole sermon, for the next 20 or so minutes as I teach you, I can guarantee the greed in you will tell you I'm not talking about you. Because someone else has more money than you, and someone else has a worse situation. Someone else, greed always tends to justify itself because we always like to think, I'm not struggling with that. I'm not I'm free from these things. And let me tell you, as we go into this, as we hear from the church fathers, that answer is no, you're wrong. Guarantee. All of us at some level find ourselves in this man, right? But again, know this today. There have been wealthy and holy Christians. It is possible. But the words of Christ, it's just difficult. So we ought not be afraid of riches or afraid of wealth, as God has given many saints with that. It's that we have to understand that there's a heart posture and that there is what I would rightly call, I think, a kingdom limitation to it. And this is where things will first begin rubbing our modern kind of capitalistic hearts the wrong way. Jesus seems in this parable to be teaching that there is in fact limits to your wealth that are not dogmatic, but hit each of us in different spaces, depending on how He's entrusted us or not, that we have to discern rightly that we can have too much, that we can push the limit in this way, right? And so he says that there's this man, as I mentioned, right, who had this barn, right, before, big enough at this point, right, we can surmise that was enough for his needs. He never filled it at this point. It was always enough. As he worked hard and lived, most likely, given just the context of the story, this man would have been about 35, 40 around my age, had a family, most likely, laborers, right, to help him till the land and harvest. He would have a small business at least going on, seemingly successful. His barns were big enough up to this point. Right? What he understood was enough, but all of a sudden, he gets more than enough. He gets more than he can handle, right? And if something, again, in this context, although very valuable, is ultimately perishable, something that will, in the end, fade, and his instinct, and this is where things begin going awry, his instinct in this parable is not to, in love, overflow that gift, right, the gift of God, because, by the way, farming, I don't even know this, but you don't control the rain, right? Or the sun, or you don't control what actually makes a good harvest. Right? You're kind of banking on God to be faithful to you, right? So God has given him this overflow, and his response to the overflow is not in love to overflow that generosity outwards, but to tear down his old infrastructure and build shiny new big ones, to create more stuff for himself, to spend more money on his own life to the point of laziness. To the point of, I don't want to work anymore, I don't want to do anything. And this is what ultimately greed begins to do in our hearts. Greed begins to center ourselves so much that I have a distorted view of my own need. I begin redefining excess as enough. I begin redefining excess as wise business practice. Well, of course I would do this, and of course I would have this. And what actively happens in this man's heart, is you notice, is he doesn't go out and explicitly destroy anyone's life, right? He's not some slanderous, gossiper who's destroying reputations. He's not a murderer taking away life. He's just a guy who came into a lot of money and decides to build bigger barns, and yet he is judged before the Lord. Why? Because what greed does is it ruins love. It distorts it, right? It brings my attention, right, from the outward act of loving, willing, and working for another's good inward into myself. What do I have and I need and what I want? And he begins to redefine what he needs before the Lord. He begins to tell himself, no, this is good. I deserve more than this. I worked hard for this. And as I've mentioned to you earlier, right, like when we, at least here at Benediction, right, one of our key hermeneutics or way we interpret the Scriptures is through the lens of the church fathers, the wisdom that God has passed through, the Spirit, right, in the church of the church. And if you go and you actively read the fathers on this text, right, it is in the most conservative way, a very hard read. It's very hard, right? They do not hold back their opinions on a text like this one. And I just want to give you a few just snippets of what they think about this. St. Augustine wrote it like this: he, the rich man, did not realize that the bellies of the poor are much safer storerooms than his barn. What he was stowing away in those barns was perhaps even then being stolen away by thieves. But if he had stowed it away in the belly of a poor man, it would of course been digested on earth, but in heaven it would have been kept all the more safe. St. Basil the Great, right, he writes it like this: For if everyone receiving what is sufficient for his own necessity would leave what remains to the needy, there would be no rich and poor among us. But if you confess that those things have come to you from God, as we do, is God then unjust in distributing to each one of us unequally? Can we figure out why you abound and another lacks? Unless that you should gain the reward of good stewardship and be honored with this need of patience. Are you not then, here's what he says, are you not then a robber for counting as your own what you have received from God to give away? I need you to see what they're doing, both of these men. All right? That's not to speak of Chrysostom and Cyril of Alexandria and other writers who speak on this text, right? What they are doing is they are making the case that as Christians, right, it is our economic strategy not to disdain wealth, but to be people of enough. People of simplicity. The issue is not having. Okay, the issue was not that this man had anything. It wasn't that he had enough. In fact, Basil says it plainly. He went beyond necessity. The issue is avariciousness, of covetousness, of wanting to have more than I actually need, of needing to hoard inside a barn, get this, what would have sustained life inside of a belly. That's the problem. That's the issue with what is happening, right? So again, this is what greed is. It's a breaking of love. It's a turning inward of my focus. And so let me say this as clearly as I can, because again, this gets wildly confused in our modern kind of political economic climate, right? From the beginning of the church, from the beginning of the church, we see it in the book of Acts, we see it in Paul's letters, we see it in the church fathers. There's always been a calling, and I want you to hear my language very particularly, okay? This is important that we get the language right. There has been a calling of Christians, right, of those who specifically have much, to willingly distribute to those who have little. There's been a calling, okay? What there is not is a compulsion or a coercive desire to force it to happen, right? some people want to argue the church's economic framework is kind of this communist, coercive, everyone just kind of piles it together. That's not been what a Christian is. Right? There's been a calling in love that those who have been blessed with much would take care of those who are struggling with little, that we would live as people who do not seek treasures upon the earth, but live simply, sufficiently, and with good stewardship in mind. Not to, again, be coerced into giving, but to be called by love, no matter the size of my domain, to steward that well, to live simply before the Lord, which is why, by the way, if you read the lives of the saints, which I do talk about a lot, one of the benefits of reading their lives is you see how diverse they are. And are there rich saints? Of course there are. There's the one saint, I can't remember his name, but I remember reading it with my family where he just couldn't give his money away fast enough. It just kept coming back to me, trying to give it more, give it more. Like, that's beautiful. And then you have, right, the complete, hermetic, people in the mountains with nothing. Right, you got emperors and you got monks, right, and both find themselves, right, as saints in God's house. Because again, the issue is not having necessarily, because of course you can be an unrighteous poor person, right? The issue for us is the desire for more than enough. And that's why I said at the beginning, if you remember, that there's this kind of kingdom limitation that is individualistic, because what is more than enough for one person might not be the exact same for someone else. What a family of 6 needs is different than what a family of 2 might need. What a person in Canada is different than a person in the States. Like there's diversity and discernment that's needed, but yet for us we must remember that the heart that just wants is not the heart of Christ. The heart that needs more and wants, where these things are not the way of Jesus. Now you might be thinking, maybe, right, that well, Mike, if I can get successful though. If I can start a good business, if I can be successful, then in the end I can actually help more people, right? Because if I have more stuff, I can be more invested in the kingdom. I can have good employees. I can be fair in my wages. I can have a common good price. I can do all those good things. Hear me today. Amen. Do that. Please. Right? Christians, in fact, should be the champions of good, strong local businesses, of good, common good practices, of wanting to bless God's people and investing in the kingdom like St. Barnabas in the book of Acts, this rich, wealthy Christian who had enough means to sell a whole field of land and give it to the poor. Like, yes, if we can do that, if God has blessed you and graced you for that, if that's part of your mega, please do that. Be a successful Christian, knowing the traps, by the way. Do it ethically, which is difficult in our modern economy. But if you can, hey, we want that. Here's what you can't be like, no one is saying, Jesus is not saying, I'm not saying, don't be successful in your area of life. Huh? I want you to be. Whatever you are, be the best at it, 100% to the glory of God. But understand something. Understand something, right? Jesus is going deeper than that. In this parable, the man's intention was not to be a blessing. Right? Sure, he had the language of, I'm blessed to be a blessing, of course, right? That's a very biblical thing. But that's not how he lived. His desire wasn't scaling up and innovating and having good business practices and trying to be economic in these things. Like that's not what it was. His intention, right, was to eat, drink, and be merry for many years. I've done enough for myself. He became like, after Thanksgiving dinner, where you eat maybe one helping too much, and all you want to do is kind of just sit there. You know what I mean? Right? That's him as a human. Right? His gluttonous heart has been so full, he just wants to sit back and do nothing. His desire is not helping but partying. I'm good now. I've made enough. I'm good. Right? In fact, his greed, and this is the tricky thing, his greed now has not brought him to this workaholism, but a sloth. Right? A hedonistic sloth. Right, where I just have, I'm good, right? It's almost the only live once idea, right? I'm just going to live it up for now, right? And here's what begins to happen, right? He makes a huge presumption. You may have missed it, but he presumes that he will have many years to enjoy it. He presumes that he's going to have all this time. And in fact, this might be the hidden lesson of this whole parable, right? In this idea, right? That he's got time. So I can just rest. This man refused to die daily because he was convinced he was going to die later. So he had time to figure out. And that night God comes to him and says, your life is now required of you. Your life is now required of you. And he is called, and this is really interesting, God comes and calls this man a fool. Which in the scriptures, if you know, it's not a nice term. right? It's someone who, even if they recognize God with their mind, denies Him with their life. It's someone who does not acknowledge that God is who God is. It's the opposite of the fear of the Lord. It's this foolish person. You can be a Christian fool 100%. It's possible, right? And he says that he's a fool, obviously for his greed. We've dealt with that, right? But for three other reasons as well, okay? Sloth and vanity that tie into this, okay? And so the first reason he is a fool, right, that I want to expose us to today is because, I don't know if you know this, but humans actually need work. His fallback of like, I'm good now, I'm never going to work a day in my life, that's a foolish thing, right? Work is not a dirty word. I don't know if you know this, but pre-fall, right, in the garden, Adam and Eve were given a job. Some theological camps call it the cultural mandate, right? Be fruitful, multiply, subdue the earth, right? Create a sub-creators under the great creator who made us. Like, do all this stuff. That work, and hard work, by the way, is a blessing to the soul, right? Famously, the Benedictine monks, they had a motto, ora le labora, which means pray and work. Pray and work. That's what they did. That's how you form the soul. You pray and you work. And interesting enough, because presumably this man is a younger man, right? This is especially true for young men, right? Young men without purpose are dangerous, just dangerous to themselves, right, to people around them, because we are not made, right, we are not made to eat, drink, and be merry. That's not why we are made, right? Just to live this literally hedonistic and empty, self-centered, meaningless life. We are called by God to take responsibility on our shoulders, to bring order to where there is chaos, to fund the kingdom, to build the kingdom wherever we may be. Like, that's the calling of a Christian, to be someone who works for something greater than themselves. We ought to do this. When we speak now of eating, drinking, and being merry, hear what that language is for us. You might be able to connect it, where we eat, drink, and rejoice. This is the Eucharist for us. Like, that's where we can come rightly say our life is ordered after eating, drinking, and merriment, when we come and we receive of Christ and encounter Christ. And then from that place, all other feasting, all other joy gets its meaning. It gets its fullness. It's derivative of the Eucharistic joy that we have now in Jesus. We do eat, we do drink, we are rejoicing, but not in this make as much money and go to Cabo kind of way. That's not what this is for us. Right? We are people who must lean into Christ, because even get this, right? In the new heavens and new earth, if you're waiting for that day, you're still working there. Did you know that? In fact, you will never stop working. I know we want to work to 65 and retire. Guess what? In the new heavens and new earth, Jesus says you'll rule and reign with Him. You'll have assignments, you'll have tasks. God will give you, right, things to do on His behalf in ruling and reigning the universe. Right. So if you're waiting for that day to be a little like, floating angel in some toga outfit, just having a heart, that's not what heaven is, right? It's not, right? Maybe you'll rule over Pluto, I don't know, right? But the thing is, you will have a job, right? You will work. And so now we work as well, right? We go into this way. And so you see sloth in this man's case, right, bred in him this insidious apathy towards what is good. And that kills his soul. Again, was he being malicious towards other people? Not necessarily, right? Not overtly, right? But where greed will corrupt our understanding of need and love, sloth begins to corrupt our understanding of what's good and necessary. And he ends up doing nothing with his own life. He's a fool. He's a fool, right? But then he's also a fool because, and this is a very big one for us today, especially as a younger church, he's a fool because he thinks he has time. He's an absolute fool for this. Right? He assumes that he's got all the time in the world, and then that night he dies, and he labors for what? God says, where does your stuff go? Right? It's going to go either to thieves or to others anyway in the end, and that's kind of the point. The stuff that we harbor, the stuff that we hoard, it will rot, it will burn, it will go to someone else who doesn't deserve it. Like this is Ecclesiastes, right? I work this hard and someone else goes and spoils it all, right? This is part of what actually happens. But he makes this fatal assumption. I've got so many years to work this out. I got time. Right? Here's my question. Says who? Well, when I'm a little bit older, says who? When I get all the money and I get the stuff, then I'll be a better present dad. Who says you have the time to do that? Yeah, but if I can just get this thing done first, who says that you will make it out of this room today? God forbid. Right? And Lord have mercy, it does not happen, but we are not guaranteed the next 45 minutes, let alone next year. Right? And yet we live in life in this way. right? That I can just plan. I can get better then. I can take care of the sin then. I know right now it's strong, but one day, that's when I'll deal with it. Says who? Right? If we take the Scripture seriously, then we see what James says, right? I will go and do this tomorrow if the Lord wills. I'll do this or this if the Lord wills. Now, here's what this doesn't do for us, and this is a really key thing. As Christians, we are not scared of death. It's been transformed for us. It's been emptied of its power. Death is a translation to His presence. That's a good thing, right? We don't want to die because we're people of life. We're not scared of it. Nor are we anxious about our life and become these kind of doomsday or prepper people. We never know when's the answer, just burn it all down. Like, that's not. We are people, right, who build in hope and live to see the salvation of the world wherever we are, starting in our very own homes and living rooms. But it's not because I presume that I have tomorrow. I make the most of every opportunity I have today because I won't be guaranteed it. Right? We have to understand that I know we are in an age and a time that assumes that we will live forever. We have literally people trying to do that right now, biohack it all. Right? We love planning 5 years and 10 years, and here's what we're going to do, and hear me today, okay? Planning in hope is a good thing, presuming in arrogance is sin. So Christians plan, of course we do, right? Because we plan that God will use this for His glory and His kingdom to come, and I want to see that happen in my life. But I remember that I will die. Hope you're encouraged by that. But I will, and you will. And here's the thing, right? Therefore, while I have breath, that's what it means to make the most of every opportunity. While I've been given breath again this day, right, I will build the kingdom. I'll build the kingdom. For at some level, what else is life for us? Because we will know, we know, right, that I will have to give an account. My soul will be required of me as well. And I will stand before the most beautiful and awesome face of Jesus Christ and look into His very human eyes and have to give an account for every word He says in Matthew, every idle word. As an individual myself, I will have to give an account, right, for my own life. I'll have to give an account for the health of my wife. I'll have to give an account for the health of my children. I'll have to give an account for everyone who came under my shepherding as a pastor over my whole life. I'll have to give an account for every one of those souls, Hebrews says. Right? I have to stand before Jesus and look Him in the face and give a reason for why I did what I did. And so will you. My life will be required of me. And His very life, Christ's life, will judge mine. In His death and resurrection, He'll have mercy upon me, thanks be to God. But I'll stand before Him and I will trust in Him. And hear me today, this thought that I've just put before you is the thought that I want to call is sanity making. It makes you sane, connects you to reality. Why? Because it literally connects you to reality. That your life, right, has a context. It's Christ's. It contextualizes your very life. And when all is said and done, you will not stand before me. Right? You will not stand before anyone. You will stand before Jesus. The one whose name that you bear if you are a Christian. And you'll give an account for your life. And I pray in that day you will find yourself standing in Him, because that is our hope. That is our gospel, that we have been forgiven, set free by the power and the blood of Him spilt on the cross and the resurrection to new life. But that doesn't reduce the fact that I will stand before Him. Right, and I will look at Him, and He will ask of me an answer. And the question really is, will I be able to give Him a good one? Not in fear, but in love. See, St. Athanasius, he wrote this. He said, "Now, if anyone lives so as to die daily, seeking that our life is naturally uncertain, he will not sin. For the greater fear destroys very much pleasure, but this rich man, on the contrary, promising to himself length of life, seeks after pleasures. For he says, rest, that is, from all toil, eat, drink, and be merry, that is, with his great luxury." St. Augustine again said it like this: "This man had never handed anything to the Lord before whom he was due to stand. How then will he know where to look when at that trial he starts hearing these words, 'I was hungry, and you did not give me anything to eat'?" Right, again, it's not fear for us. It ought not be fear. Right, in the sense of terror, but of reverence, of course. Right? Not that I'm worried, right, that God will somehow in that day reject me because we are in Christ. This is the gospel. But yet, I want my life to be one that looks like His. Right? It is possible. It is possible for a Christian to make light of grace. in light of mercy by refusing to do what Christ says. So friends, in hope, I pray that you will remember that you will die and rightly live like you already have. Because if you don't, how else do we live as Christians, honestly? Like if we just think about this practically, how else, other than dying already to self, dying daily, how else do we live as those in the world who are unoffendable? Those who are unattached to the stuff, those who love well and love full and love as Christ is called. Like how else do we be those people who inherit the earth as the meek amongst us? How else can we do that unless we've already died to reputation and died to selfishness and died to passion and died to feel like unless that's already happened, like how else do we do this life? Like unlike this man, right? When we do that right, we know that our life is held up in the very hands of Christ, that He is our safe place, that He is our comfort, because we recognize again, and this is where it's a paradox of the Christian life. We recognize that anything that we build to the self, anything, any barn, any statue, any business, any building, any platform, any nation itself, in the end will become ash. Nothing you build, right, for the self is eternal. And truly, when we are looking at our life, the investments and the things that will last into forever are the souls that we raise. The people that we love, right, the image bearers of God that we disciple, these things, these are immortal. Everything else becomes ash in time. And yet, let's be honest about our perspectives and our priorities about how we live life. Now, that doesn't mean, and this is the paradox, that doesn't mean that we don't build to the glory of God. Of course we do, right? Christians have always desired to build beautiful things and long-standing things and faithful things unto God, right? Because here's something that we have to connect, right, is that we are embodied souls, yes? Right? And so we are affected not just in the mind, but in the body. And so we are affected by the stuff of life. And so in a very real sense, Christians have always tried to, and I use this word very carefully, right, but try to incarnate the kingdom amongst us through what we build. That we make it visible on how we build and what we build and how we create and the art that we make and the building and the business and the stuff that because we understand to what end it is for. It's His. Therefore, if I'm building as a Christian, everything I build, every business I might have or any art I might create or whatever it is, it's ultimately an offering to God and therefore deserves to be the most beautiful thing I can make. So of course I do these things. Of course we build it up, but I recognize that this is an offering to not myself but to Him, which then leads to the last reason why this man is a fool, which we today would call vanity. And maybe it's the ultimate reason he is a fool, right? Because did you notice in these few verses, how often my comes up? I will build, and I'll say to myself, in my barns and my grain, and I will relax, and the whole thing is just this man in his own mind. Everything is about himself, right? And he doesn't even have the humility, right, to ask around. How ought he do this? Now, here's the funny thing, because this parable, contextually, he's a Jewish man, which means that this man knows of the law of Moses. He knows that in the law of Moses, right, farmers are commanded to not actually harvest their full fields, but leave enough at the edges for the poor to come and receive of the bounty of God, right, through these other people, right, to leave the edges waiting. But here we see a man with no wisdom, a man with no accountability. Right? He's a man with no friends, it seems like, no counsel. Hasn't even listened to his wife. So he's a fool for a fifth reason, right? And he's there, and all he says to himself, right, is I definitely ought to do this. I ought to build bigger barns. No one to correct him, no one to speak back, which again, remember what Jesus started off with. Watch out. Be watchful. Right? What we see in this man's heart initially, the sin that starts this all off, is he was not watchful. He did not guard his heart against the demonic thoughts and impressions, right? These passions that get waged in our soul, this war that happens. There's no correction to evil thinking. For how can he be corrected? All he is just here, just going, right? Just justifying everything that he does, right? And so he fails on these two accounts. Right? He is so high on himself for a success which, by the way, he could not bring. It was a gift of God. That's why the farming metaphor is so beautiful in this case, right? That he thinks he needs no one. Because you would maybe ask the question, like if he had asked his friend or maybe a businessman or whatever, right? Hey, what should I do in this situation? Right? Maybe a friend could possibly say to him, hey, have you considered maybe like giving some of it away? You have more than enough. Hey, you know, Bob, he's struggling right now. You think maybe, Jeremy and his family, they're going through a rough time. Like, hey, obviously you didn't harvest this all by yourself, so you clearly had a team of laborers. We might want to just like say thank you to them. Maybe give them a little bonus this year because it's been such a good year. They worked clearly hard for you. Like maybe you could have done some other things, but instead of hearing anything, he becomes an idolater of his own soul. Clearly, I'm the wisest person to make these decisions. And he's blinded to the influence, hear me today, of the enemy. He's blinded to the influence of the passions, and he falls to greed, sloth, and the demon of vanity. In fact, right, later on, St. Cyril of Alexandria, he wrote that greed is a pitfall of the devil and a snare of evil spirits. That's how he described it. Right? And what this begins saying to me, right, is his heart became so unruly because he was not watchful. He did not guard the impressions and the thoughts that came into his heart, right? He did not guard these places and take them captive. Therefore, he became captive of them and became an easy soil for the enemy to sow these seeds of death and decay, which, again, leads me to this conclusion that you ought to not believe everything you think. Just because it crosses your mind doesn't make it holy. Just because your imagination has, it doesn't mean it's from the Lord, right? And we must kind of guard the heart with humility, be able to have these things corrected. Because, I don't know if you know this, but sometimes humans have dumb thoughts. I have been, victim of some pretty dumb thoughts, right? Whether it's against myself or others or decisions to make, right? Like these things come into my mind, right? And I kind of attach them and then get all worked up in them. But hear me today, like a lot of them, like they're dumb, selfish thoughts. And here's the thing, is you actually need other people, right, to help you deal with that. Because you, in your own mind, so easily justify yourself. That's the problem. You'll convince yourself that you're right. That's not wrong to want these things. It's not wrong to do these things. I deserve it. I've been in these places. I know. And again, in so doing, okay, and this is where things it's going to sound quite intense, but it's true. In so doing, you can lead yourself to agree with Satan. You can say yes to his wisdom. You can say yes to what he desires. Because remember, Paul says, St. Paul in Ephesians chapter 6, that the war that we're in is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and rulers of the air, these spiritual powers that seek our destruction. So Jesus says, guard your heart against all covetousness, because it's idolatry. It's idol worship in a very real sense. Right? And you must therefore take captive every thought, learning to discern your own heart. But hear me today, you don't do that alone. Part of that is alone. Okay, don't hear what I'm not saying, right? Part of our guarding the heart is that spiritual discipline, right? It's prayer, it's study, it's stillness, it's silence, it's letting the Holy Spirit kind of just come and move upon us and examine us, as the psalmist says, that is what we must be doing, but in conjunction, okay, with godly mothers and fathers of the faith, guides and confessors and helps who can look at your life and say, that thought that you're thinking is wrong. Your desire here is distorted. No, you actually are greedy. And have someone say this to you. Right? And so my pastoral call to us today is don't be what God calls a fool. Sounds simple, I know, right? But don't be a lazy, greedy, vain, presumptuous, isolated, unkept glutton. Don't be that guy, you know what I mean? Right? There's Jesus' teaching for us, right? But you might be thinking, okay, Mike, I get it. Right? Jesus says, right, don't be greedy, don't be excessive, don't be lazy, whatever. But how then do we rightly hold our stuff? Because if I've made the case this whole morning, that's not wrong necessarily to have things, obviously, right? We need to eat, we need to drink, right? We need to have homes, we need to provide for our family, of course, right? How then do I relate to those things? How do I do this? Well, luckily for us, in the grace of God, Jesus has given us the answer, right? Because right after this parable, here's what Jesus says. Therefore, I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, about what you will eat, nor about your body and what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They neither have storehouses or barns, and yet God feeds them. And how much more value are you than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to your life? If then you are not able to do such a small thing as that, why are you anxious about all the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all of his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive today in the field, and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? So do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried. For all the nations, the Gentiles, they seek after these things, but your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek His kingdom, and these other things will be added to you. So fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you that kingdom. So sell your stuff and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches nor moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. That's how we deal with it. But here's the problem. This is my last kind of idea for today, okay? You have, I would say, two options with what Jesus just said. Either you can chalk that up to kind of nice, sage-like spiritual, woo stuff. Yes, God knows what I need. He's good. Right? Or you take Him at His word. Those are the only two options. Right? You either have to think that Jesus is just being kind of like platitudinal and just saying all these things that of course we know God loves you and God's going to take care of you and look at the birds and so I don't have to worry. Like either that's just nice platitudes that can comfort the soul when I'm in struggle, or He's right. And the way the world works in the grace of God is that He will take care of us. And therefore I need no attachment to the stuff. Right? Some will argue there's a third option of trying to be more nuanced. But usually just means an excuse to not believe what He says at face value. So here there is a tension. There is a tension, right? Will we say, yes, Lord, I will not then fear because I know you got me. I'll not chase after these things that the world chases after. I'll trust that you know what I need before you even ask. I'll go to you knowing that your storehouses are always full and that what you give me is what I actually need in this season. Will I trust you? Will I give as you call me to give? Will I fear not as part of your little flock? Will I respond to these things, right? To the poor, He says, do not fear. If you're someone who struggles financially right now, hear the words of Christ. Fear not, little flock. Fear not. For you have riches that nothing can steal. You have treasures that cannot be taken. But to the rich, hear me today. Someone who's more well off. And I know. Whenever I say that, it's like, well, what does that actually mean? And what level? And compared to what? Okay, let the Lord convict you. To the rich, that fear that the poor has, that is for you to alleviate. That's for you to take care of. So be someone who does that well. As grace enables, see the provision of God on your life, because it's there. Now here's what the reality is. Some of you have been given more to steward than others. Well, that's not fair. Great, life isn't. Some of you have been given and entrusted with God, right? With more other things than someone else. Some of you are tempted by more, and some of you are tempted in your lack. That's not for us to decide. That's not for us to worry about. But what we can confess, all of us the same, is what St. Paul confesses in Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Him who gives me strength. Which he didn't say about sports, by the way, right? But about this very thing, to be content in all things. Paul's like, I've learned the secret. I know. I can be, through Christ, I can do all things. I can be shipwrecked. I can have nothing. I can have a bunch. I can do all things because Christ is my supply. And so my church, I call you today to do these few things, okay? Guard your heart, please. Trust the Lord. Give generously. Steward well. Work hard. Live simply. Open-handed. Be content. Provide for your family. And build the kingdom to the glory of God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That's how we live in the world. That's how we go about this. And if you're here today, if you're honest with yourself and you have been taken over by greed, by vanity, or by sloth, today is a day of beautiful repentance. Because these things are not sin unto death. They need not be. But I would say to you that you need to come and lay them before the Lord Jesus and know that the life He has for you is far more meaningful than the life you've been chasing. Truly. Right. Chasing after stuff and things, it might give a high in a moment, but it never actually does what it promises. So I pray you'll come to the glorious kingdom of heaven and find your life captured by the context of Christ's life, death, and resurrection. And if you are here today and never given your life to Christ, I need you to know, right, what God says to this man, He'll say to all of us, today your soul is required of you, and you will stand before Him. And the gospel, the good news of Jesus, as Paul says, is that He who was rich became poor so that we might become rich in Him. This is the gospel that Christ came and gave His life for us. That we who were poor in our sin, poor in spirit, will be made rich towards God through Christ and His great treasure of His own life. And all of us who can come, we can come and receive life to Him in Him today by faith in Jesus. All you got to do, right, is ultimately trust Him. Which for us is not just in the mind, it's in the body and the heart. It's a trust and obey Christ to come and follow Him, and you'll be put on the path of healing, wholeness, and life. And I call all of us today into that. Don't wait another day. Again, who says you have tomorrow? I can't guarantee you that. But I can guarantee this. Today, if you cry out to Christ, He will save you. He will rescue you, and He will redeem you. Amen.